Okay, good morning, everyone. I am really sorry. I completely lost track of my schedule. Um, so, don't know if anybody's still on. I hope people have a chance to see this eventually. Okay, we are on Perek Zion Mishna Gimel. And we'll just do part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah reads like this. Klipe Rimain Vahanet Shalai. Klipe Rimain means rinds of pomegranate and its blossoms. The Mishnah is going to right now until now, we're discussing different parts of the plant, and now we're going to be discussing, as the Yad Aram says, secondary parts of the tree, of the fruits. So klipe rimoin, the klipe rimoin, the rinds of pomegranate, and the nates shalai, they translate it as its blossom. And the Yad Aram explains the bloom of the pomegranate mentioned here refers to a greenish sprouting at the tip of the fruit. It surrounds the pestle-like protuberance at the blossom end of the plant, and it itself is encircled by the cone-like crown of the tip of the pomegranate. So again, try to picture it in your mind. You have the top of the pomegranate. It's got some kind of like what I would think is like a pitum that we say on an esrog, and there is a green leaf a greenish sprouting at the tip of the fruit. It surrounds this pitum, this thing that comes up, and it itself is surrounded by like this crown at the tip of the pomegranate. Now, the point is that, as we're going to see, that these were used for dyeing. And as we say, anything that's used for dyeing, that is considered a fruit for the purposes of Shemitah. Because dyeing is similar enough to eating, because you benefit from it as you use it up. So therefore, the Mishnah is going to be, Mishnah now, first examples are these pomegranate rinds and its blossom. Klipe egoizim, we translate it as husks of nuts. We're not talking about the shells around the nut itself. We're talking about a husk that's around the shell, that's around the actual nut. Bagalinim, and pits. Yesh lahem shvius, they have the sanctity of Shemitah, l'dmei and shvius. And any money that was exchanged for them also has the sanctity of Shemitah, as we have already had before. Now, again, all these things that we're talking about here were used for the purposes of dyeing, and therefore they will have the sanctity of Shemitah. When it comes to the pits, so first of all, going back to the walnut husks, the actual shell around the walnuts themselves isn't used for dyeing. It's like a piece of wood. It doesn't have any sanctity of Shemitah. While the husk around that was using for dyeing, and therefore it has the sanctity of Shemitah. Ratinu explains when it comes to the pits that we just said about Galinim pits, we're talking about pits that have some kind of a use like food. For example, the hard shell of olive pits can be broken open to yield an inner edible kernel as well as additional oil. There's this pit inside that has usage. You can either eat it, you can extract more oil from it. Similarly, date pits were used for fodder. Date pits were used for animal feed, and therefore such pits are subject to Shemitah sanctity, just like any plant product used for human or animal food. So that's what we have here. We have here examples of things that will have the sanctity of Shemitah. They are not the plant itself and not the fruit itself. Nonetheless, they're either used for dye or they actually have a purpose, they have a use for human consumption and animal consumption, and therefore they have the sanctity of Shemitah. And if you were to pay for them, exchange money for them, you might even get the sanctity of Shemitah. Now, the Yad Aram points out that there is no mention here of beer, the mitzvah of beer that we mentioned previously, which is the mitzvah of that when it's not available for the animals in the field, that now what you have collected, you have to take out of your house and render it ownerless. There's no mention of that here in these cases. So according to one explanation, it could be that these things being mentioned, these rinds and this blossom, these husks and these seeds are all available in the fields for the animals to eat, and therefore there would be no mitzvah of beer that is relative to them. Okay, we'll start the next part of it. We will continue. Hatzaba tzaveh la'atzmai. This means that somebody who is a dyer, tzaveh la'atzmai, he may dye something for himself, but he cannot dye for payment. He can't dye for someone else who's going to pay him for it. She'ein oisim schar b'peresh shvius. One is not allowed to do business with the produce of Shemitah. You can't do business. That's a separate prohibition. You can do something for yourself. You can eat it for yourself. However, collect it for yourself, or in this case, dye it for yourself. But you can't dye it for someone else who's going to pay for it. Then it's considered an act of doing business with the produce of Shemitah, and therefore to go ahead and do it for pay, that wouldn't be permissible to do. Okay. And now the Mishnah is going to go to other examples of things that we may not do business with. We can't act business-like with them. So the first thing that was mentioned was the produce of Shemitah. And the example given here was the dyer who was dyeing something for taking the Shemitah produce to dye, which is something you're allowed to do. There's nothing wrong with doing that per se. It's like eating. It's allowed to do. You just have to treat it properly with the safety of Shemitah. Just like you eat, you could dye with the plant. The thing is, though, you can't do business with it. If somebody's going to pay you for doing it, then already that's called doing schar. It's doing business with the produce of Shemitah. Nor can you do business with firstborn animals. Now, a firstborn male animal, where we're talking about, we're talking about either from a cow, from sheep, has sanctity to it. And actually, it's supposed to be taken to the Beis HaMikdash and offered as a sacrifice. However, if it gets a blemish that renders it invalid to be used for a sacrifice, then the halacha is that it belongs to a Kohen, but it has no sanctity. So in this case, we are talking about someone who has these blemished firstborn animals, and he is basically going to sell them. Now, my understanding of this is, although I don't see it explicitly mentioned here in the Yad HaRab, that, if it belongs to the Kohen, so you can't go ahead and sell it. It's not yours. You can't go do business with it. There'd be no possibility of doing business with it. It belongs to the Kohen. So either, we're talking about the Kohen himself, it belongs to him, it has no sanctity. He can go ahead and sell it if he wants. Or perhaps you're being a middleman for a Kohen, for the Kohanim, and selling it to another Kohen. But whatever the case is, you're holding onto this animal for the purposes of selling it. And that you may not do. The reason you may not do it is because although it doesn't have the sanctity to be used as a sacrifice because it's blemished, but you can't use it to work with. You can't use it to shear its wool. That's still forbidden to do. If you're going to leave this animal around to basically hold on to it, to be able to sell it, to do business with it, we're afraid you may come to use it in the wrong manner, and therefore the sages instituted, this is a rabbinic prohibition. The sages instituted that you're not allowed to go ahead and do business with these firstborn animals. Doing business with the produce of Shemitah, that's the Raisa, the Torah prohibition. But when it comes to the firstborn, according to Torah law, would be permitted to do. Nonetheless, when it comes to the Chachamim were concerned that if you're going to be holding on to these animals to do business with them, that you're going to land up misusing them, not using them properly. And therefore, they said no doing business with the firstborn. Okay, we will continue the rest of this Mishnah tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem. Now let's do the Sefer HaMitzvot. Okay. The short one, Mitzvah Samach Vav, Mitzvah 66, Mitzvah Aseh Lipein Schar Sofer B'Yayim. Positive commandment to pay the hired man on the same day. If you hired someone to work for the day, you hired him for the day. So by the end of the day, by that same day, you have to pay him. Shenemar, as it says, in his day, you shall give him his wages. So that means you have a worker, he worked for you by day, he finishes, by the time he's finished, by the time the day is finished of his work, you have to go ahead and pay him. I do believe that means that if he was a daytime worker, then by the end of the day, you have to pay him. If his job was by night, then by the end of the night. The Ger Toishev, now there is someone called a Ger Toishev, which we can translate as a resident alien, resident stranger. He is not a full-fledged Ger. He has not accepted conversion to Judaism. Rather, in front of a Beis Din, he has accepted to keep the 7 Noahide laws. When a Gentile does that, he gets a certain status. His status is ger tosha, and he's treated in some way similar to a Jew. So when it comes to ger tosha, this mitzvah of paying the worker in the same day, that applies to a ger tosha also. This applies in all places at all times, both by men and by women. Whoever the person doing the hiring is, whoever this worker is working for, that person, whether it's a man, whether it's a woman, has an obligation to pay him in that day itself. Let's do the next mitzvah, Samach Zayin, which is 67. Mitzvah Saseh Ladun Dini Mekach Memkar, positive commandment to judge matters of business. Binyan Shesip Sa Torah Alav, in the manner that the Torah commanded in regarding it. Kolaimar, meaning to say, there are certain ways where a business transaction will be considered valid according to the Torah, and sometimes it's not. The Torah commands us to judge these interactions following the laws of the Torah. And there's a specific mitzvah in a specific parsha. If you sell something to your friend, if you buy something from your friend, you have to make sure that it's done right. And the Torah doesn't just give us the laws of how it's done. The Torah mandates that we make sure it gets done properly. Because this is something very common amongst people. No one can survive without being able to do these kinds of transactions. And therefore, there is a specific mitzvah that is put upon the people, put upon the nation, which is carried out by the Bezdin, by a rabbinic court of law, to make sure that these things are done correctly. The karka niknis bekesef u'b'shtar b'chazaka. Real estate, land can be purchased either through money, through a document, or through a demonstration of ownership. That's what chazaka here means, demonstration of ownership. Metaltalin and movable objects, behem and animals, the meshicha, by drawing it to yourself, by bringing it to yourself. The chol shekain bagba v'kayetze bazeh, and all the more so if you actually lift it up or do other similar or other types of transactions that can be used for these things. So the Chavetz Chaim is just laying out the most basic form of what the Torah says, how this is done, how that is done. There are, of course, many other laws involved. And the mitzvah here says we have to make sure that we judge when people have an issue about the transactions, that we judge it according to what the Torah says it can be done. This applies in all places and at all times. Have a wonderful day. And there will be for those that's relevant to, the family learning will be at 5 o'clock this afternoon. And again, there'll be a share tonight at 8 o'clock, part 2 of counting the Omer, counting up to receiving the Torah. Have a great day. And again, I apologize for being so late. Bye-bye.